Okay, we're now recording. Okay, so we have a fair amount to do today. We're going to finish up company law. We're almost done with that. Then we'll get into employment law. I asked the office about the final exam, and I was told that they didn't give me an exact date, but it looks like our final exam will be the 28th, which will be 2 classes from now. So next week will be the 21st, and that means next week will be our final review. And then after that will be our final class. So, or our final exam. So without, unless anything changes after today, we have one more class, and in that class, we will do a review. Maybe we'll learn a few new things, but mostly review. So let's jump right in and start talking about company law. Are there any questions before we can get started? No, okay. So last week we got to companies. We finished LLPs. So you guys should, and I mean, like I said, the final's coming up. So I'm not really going to take the time right now to go through incorporation and piercing the veil, all of the stuff we did, and then all the stuff about partnerships and the duties of partnerships and the stuff we did about that last week. Let's just go to companies and finish up. Okay, so we started last week by talking about kind of what is a company, and we said it's simply an incorporated organization. And everybody now should understand what is incorporation. It is a process to create a separate legal entity. And you should understand what that means and what rights and powers a separate legal entity has. We talked about the difference between a public and a private company. We said public is PLC and the stock is on the stock exchange. Private is LTD, and they can sell stock, but they can only sell it to private people. And you can sell it to anybody you want. You can sell it to your friends, but you can't sell it to strangers. You can't just put it on the stock market for sale to the public, or put an ad on the web on a website that says I'm selling my stock to anybody. It has to be that you're selling it to people you choose. We learned that almost all companies are private, but that the few, less than 1% of public companies, they are the ones who really own kind of everything. And then we talked about unlimited companies and limited companies. So we said an unlimited company is a company that has unlimited liability, right? That's the #1 problem. They have unlimited liability. But of course, the benefit of an unlimited company, the drawback is unlimited liability. The benefit is accounts need not be published. So you don't need to tell the government what you spent your money on. And then we finished by talking about limited companies. And we said companies could be limited by share or guarantee. And today is the 13th. Today's the 13th or the 14th? 14th for you guys. So limited companies can be limited by shares or guarantees. We talked about this last week. Almost all companies are limited by shares. What does that mean, Nicola, that companies are limited by shares?
Well, it's like you divide The company share, so each owner of share, it's a partner of the company.
Sure. By the way, Carlotta, Isaac, Ploy, if possible, please turn on your cameras unless it is a bandwidth problem. So yes, each person owns a part of the company. However, with limited by guarantee, they also own a part of the company. So both limited by shares and guarantee own a part of the company. The difference is really about the payment. When you buy a company limited by shares, you pay for one share or 10 shares or whatever. And that's it. You've paid, and there's no way you're going to pay more. If you buy some shares of Apple today, you paid. And no matter what happens to the price, you don't owe more money. Where a share limited by guarantee, you do not pay today. You don't pay anything, but you guarantee that if the company goes into liquidation, what does liquidation mean? Anybody know? Yeah, Florian.
When you sell out all of your share, you sell out all of your assets, and then each shareholder have a certain amount of money in percentage or related to your share percentage.
Well, sure. And liquidation, yeah, just means the company goes out of business, they sell everything. So if the company goes out of business and sells everything, and you own shares limited by guarantee, now you pay. So they're kind of opposites. A company limited by shares, you pay when you buy the share. A company limited by guarantee, you don't pay until the company goes out of business. Advantages of limited companies. So it's the same thing as, we've learned for incorporation. Limited liability is number one. And these are the rules from Salomon v. Salomon. A company is responsible for its own debts. A legal personality, right? The company is a person. It can own property, make contracts, and be sued. Perpetual succession. The company can never die. It's easier to raise capital because you can sell stock. There are tax benefits, and then credibility. Companies are more trustworthy than a sole partnership, just running a business by yourself. People will trust companies more. What are some disadvantages of running a company? Anybody tell me a disadvantage of running a company?
There's a possibility of loss.
Well, but there's a possibility of loss in all business.
Maybe it costs you money to open a company.
The risk. You have no social benefits. Everything is on you.
But okay, so, I agree with what Nicholas said. It costs money and time to open a company. That's true. As for risk, if I start doing business as a sole practitioner, a sole proprietor, I'm just doing business by myself, I still have risk. It's not like a company gives me less risk because my personal assets are protected. The company is limited liability. But you do have a lot of requirements if you open a company, right? Much more than a sole trader or a partnership. You have lots of requirements of what information you need to tell the government. The government has a lot of regulations about, do you need directors? Do you need meetings? Do you need a memorandum of association, articles of association? Like all of these rules the government gives you, and it does cost money. Another big disadvantage, if I open a company today, let's say I start a company called David Incorporated, and we sell healthy food, and you guys are my first shareholders. Each of you guys has 100 shares, and you're all the shareholders of David Incorporated. And I also have 100 shares, same as you guys. I don't have controlling. We each have an equal amount. Now, let's say that you guys get together and you don't like the way I'm running this business. This is David Health Foods, but you don't like the way I'm running the business. Can you fire me? So there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of you here now, 8. There's 8 people plus me. So let's say my company has a total of 1,000 shares. I have 200 and each of you have 100 shares. Could you all get together? There's 8 of you. That's 800 out of 1,000 shares. 8/10, 4/5. You own 4/5 of the shares. Could you fire me?
Yes.
Even though I started the company?
Yes.
Yeah. Because you have no right to participate in your company. Now, if I start a sole trader, just I start selling drinks and it's just a business, can someone fire me from my company? No. There's no stocks, there's no shares, I own it. Now, could I sell you 20% of the business? Sure, I could sell you a percentage, but you still can't fire me. If we have a partnership, you can't really get rid of me unless you can prove I'm doing something wrong. And if you do get rid of me, the whole partnership closes. If I have a partnership with Nicola and Nicola says David is a terrible business person, he's cheating and lying, we go to court to dissolve the partnership. Okay, but then you can't keep doing business. It's dissolved, it's over. But with a company, you could start it, get fired, and someone else runs your company.
I think this is quite the history of McDonald's.
The history of McDonald's. I mean, I
You know,
only know what was in that movie, The Founder,
Yeah, exactly.
which is
Looks
pretty,
like the same
pretty
for
dark.
me.
I mean, I think that guy just kind of stole the idea, but yes, that was
But
pretty
it
dark.
somehow is actually what you are talking to us now. It's kind
Well,
of the owners, but I don't know.
I mean, in that case, it was more a case of intellectual property, that they owned the rights to an idea, and this guy, they never turned it into a company. They ran a restaurant, but they never trademarked it, patented it. They didn't do anything. It was their idea. And then someone else came along and said, I'm going to make that into a company. And they had no rights to stop him. You know, if unless you can prove it was yours. And these days, it's more, that's similar to what happened with Facebook, where the Winklevoss twins were able to prove that Mark Zuckerberg stole their idea, that they came to him with an idea. He said he would work on it, and then he stole it and opened a company called Facebook. He was the CEO. Now, they can't fire him. They're not shareholders. They don't have any power to fire him, but he had to pay them because he stole their intellectual property. Now, Bill Gates could have been fired if all the shareholders got together and chose to fire him. You know, any founder doesn't have a right to participate. Of course, if you own more than 75% of the shares, then you can't be thrown out, because you just own too many shares. You have the voting rights. The Dodge brothers were good friends with Mr. Ford. That's true. And they had original stock in Mr. Ford's business making cars. The Ford Car Company made a lot of money, and it made so much money that Mr. Ford gave dividends to the Dodge brothers, who were the original stockholders. So the Dodge brothers used their money to start their own car company called Dodge. And when Mr. Ford learned about this, he stopped the special payments. And the Dodge brothers demanded the money. And he said, Mr. Ford said he wanted to invest the money and hire more people. So the Dodge brothers sued Mr. Ford to make him stop building a new factory and pay the special dividends. And what the court said in this case is that Mr. Ford had to pay the special dividends. Why? And this goes to kind of the point of corporations and companies. What is the purpose of a company? We said this right at the very beginning. What's the purpose of Apple? Is the purpose of Apple to make computers? Jody, is the purpose of Apple to make computers?
No, I believe probably to make profit.
Correct. For who?
For the company and the shareholder.
The shareholders. They are the owners. It doesn't matter if Apple starts selling coffee or pencils or windows, it makes no difference. Apple's job is to make money for the shareholders. They have no need to sell computers. except for some corporate law rules that we haven't learned about in this class, where if you make a company, you do need to tell the government what your company is going to do. And you can't, because companies can't just do anything. If you want to open a company that teaches English, like in China, for example, you need to tell the government what you want to do, and you need to give them a category of what you do. So that might be like teaching and education services. And then you cannot, for example, do import and export. That would be a separate category of business. Companies can't just do anything. They have to tell the government what they're going to do. And then if you break that, so this is actually quite important in China because a lot of Chinese companies kind of play a game about this. They'll open a company that they choose a very easy category. So for example, an easy category in China would be consulting. Consulting is a very broad category. Now, consulting is interesting because it doesn't mean teaching. But what a lot of companies will do is they'll open, it's very hard to open a teaching company in China, almost impossible, but very easy to open a consulting company. So people will open a consulting company and then try to hire you to be a teacher. And if you didn't know, then you, and this is crazy, but you can go to jail because you have an illegal visa. You had a visa to work as at a consulting company, but you're not being a consultant, you're being a teacher. So you are breaking the law. And according to Chinese law, it doesn't matter if you knew, you should have known. And you could say, well, how was I supposed to know? Doesn't matter. You should have known. So it's actually pretty important. Now, that case doesn't happen very much, although it does happen. Foreigners have been sent to jail for teaching illegally when they had no idea the company was doing this. It is very important to ask a company if you can see their papers of incorporation or their business license to find out what is, and it's called the scope of business. What's their scope? Now, one thing that happens more commonly in China is imagine you want to do some import and export. So I go to Jody's company, and Jody, you have a company in China, and I say, I want to do import export. You say, okay, you know how to ship things from China to America. And I say, great. And I want to sell this stuff, and so fine. I pay you all this money, and then you never ship it to America. And I sue you. Well, what if your scope of business was a consulting company? You never had the legal right to ship things to America. So I'm going to lose that court case. It's my fault. I should have known. I was trying to do business with a company that didn't have. Now, would you be in trouble? Maybe, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to lose my money. So, and it's not really a threat for me to say, Jody, I'm going to tell the police that you had what's called ultra vires, that you were ultra vires, which means you were operating a business outside of your scope of business. In China, you're not really going to care because the government doesn't really care, but I'm going to lose my money. So you really do want to know what the scope of business is of any company. Now, in the case of the Ford car company, their scope of business was to produce cars. They made a lot of money. The Dodge brothers are shareholders, and the purpose of a company is to make money for the shareholders. The purpose of the company is not to stop other competitors. If the Dodge company wanted to open a competing company, which they did, they can, and that's fine. A company is organized for the profit of the shareholders. That is it. And that's the end of company law. Any questions about company law?
Yes, is there any exclusion clause for the shareholders? For example, within the next 3 years, you cannot open a direct competitors or something like this?
No, because you're not an employee. There might be exclusion clauses against employees saying if you work for us, then you're learning, we're teaching you stuff about the business for the next 3 years. You can't go out and compete with us. But there would be no clause like that for shareholders. You're just making a profit. We're not teaching you about the business. You're not stealing our information.
But after the 3 years, when the employee went out from the company, they can open a new business like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you might see, like, for example, in China, you'll see clauses often if you teach at like a kindergarten or something, they'll try to say, if you quit, then for the next 6 months, you can't teach at another kindergarten. First of all, that's not really true. Those kind of exclusion clauses, the rule is they must be reasonable for the benefit of the business. They must be necessary. So if you work for my company teaching, let's say, English theater, I'm having you teach theater, and I'm the only company in Shanghai that does this. Now, if I teach you how to do it, and so Junpyo, you come right from university, and I teach you the David method of teaching English with theater, well, then of course I don't want you to quit and go start your own business, because I just taught you my secret way. And if I said you need to wait 6 months, maybe that's reasonable, because I don't want you to just leave right now and open another business that competes. Or if I said a year or even 2 years, that could be okay. I could never say 10 years or something, or a lifetime or anything like that. But if you work for my kindergarten and I say you can't work for another kindergarten, why do I need you to not work for another kindergarten? How does it hurt my business if you go work for another kindergarten, or just, there's lots of kindergartens. So that isn't reasonably necessary for the business. It has to be reasonably necessary.
And also, teacher, every or any exclusion clause have a limitation, right? It cannot
Absolutely.
be lifetime.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this will be our final subject. We should be able to get through most of employment law today, but you know, there might be a few things that I skip over, jump over, because the most important thing I want to teach is kind of in the middle of it. But the idea of employment law is pretty new. It's just as new as company law. It's not like contracts or torts, where there are cases from the 1300s or the 1600s. Employment law isn't like that. So for most of history, you did what your parents did. Or maybe your parents would help to apprentice you, and they would give you an apprenticeship, and they would find you would maybe live with the farmer, the carpenter, the plumber, the doctor, whatever, and you would just learn to do the business from this person. Nobody really, I mean, this whole life that we have now, where you can graduate college and do anything you want, that's very new in the history of the world. So the idea of employment law really reflects this. This is why most of your contracts, especially in a place like China, start as 1-year contracts. Now, in America, we don't really do this anymore, but in China, they still do. They have 1-year contracts. This comes from the idea of farming and agriculture. You always wanted people to have a 1-year contract so that they wouldn't just work during the harvest and then you fire them. That's not fair. Or you hire them in the winter, they don't do anything, but you're paying them every month. And then when the harvest comes, they quit. You know, that's not fair either. So traditionally, contracts were 1 year just to protect this sort of agricultural agrarian society, so that you will be employed during the harvest and during the fallow season, the off season. And, you know, this has continued in the 18th and 19th centuries. So late 1700s and the 1800s, this was the Industrial Revolution in England and then later in America. This is where people started to leave the farms and go into the city, and there was urbanization. This was the first time that there was real anonymity between the bosses and the employees. Prior to this, bosses pretty much knew who their employees were. Now you have these gigantic factories where a boss might have tens of thousands of employees and they didn't know them at all. And when you don't know people, it's very easy. It's much easier to treat them badly. And so the bosses would treat workers very badly, and the workers had no power at all. Everybody was what's called at will. Everybody was at will, which meant you could quit the job anytime you want. And you could also be fired anytime you want. You certainly didn't have to give 1 week notice or 2 weeks notice. That's a government rule. You didn't have to do anything like that. You could be fired or you could quit. And so because of this, in the 20th century, so starting in the 1900s, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the book, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, but it's a book about the meatpacking industry in America in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and what conditions were like. It's a novel. It's very, very good and very disturbing, very hard to read, you know, because people's lives were just terrible. And that's the way it was. The workers had very difficult lives, and you couldn't just go to another factory because they're all the same. It's just terrible conditions everywhere. So that was when the government started to recognize that employees have no equity. They just have no power to fight these big bosses, and they started to bring in more regulations. So what we're looking at in this part of the class is some of these regulations about employment law. The things that are most important to me, like for the final, are the terms implied, rules of notice, and especially forms of dismissal. To me, the forms of dismissal is kind of the most important. It's a very ugly star, kind of the most important part. So written particulars, let's just go through these very quickly so I can explain what they are before we do a little more of a deep dive. That star is too ugly. Let's make a nicer star. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yay, okay. So written particulars. Written particulars are also known as terms and conditions. So you might have seen this if you ever got a job where you get a contract, and the contract might be like 1 page or 2 pages. Contracts aren't that long, but then it'll say like, for information on healthcare, see the terms and conditions. And then there's an appendix, a whole separate thing that might be 10 pages or longer that says terms and conditions. And here's where all of this legal language is. And it's part of the contract. That's in England, it's called written particulars. In America, it's called terms and conditions. And we'll learn a little bit about the rules of those and when you need to get them and what happens if you don't get them. Next is terms implied. So what does the word implied mean? Juntia, what does implied mean?
Terms laid in the contract.
Terms what?
Laid, like.
Implied means they're not named.
Oh.
They're implied. What is, Isaac, can you tell us about the word implied?
It's like the meanings. I don't know if I'm right or not. I think it's like the meanings there. You should have known about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Just like if you're hanging out with a friend and your friend says, "Oh, I'm so tired. Man, I'm really tired right now." Maybe in China, what they're saying is, you need to leave right now so I can go to bed. Right? They're not going to say it. They're polite, but they're implying it. It's something that you should know, but it's not being said. Now, there are things in a contract that are not said, but they're in the contract. They don't have to be said. So, for example, in Chinese contracts, they will sometimes say these things. For example, you must have good faith. I've signed Chinese contracts that say you must have good faith and clean hands. In American contracts, we would never say that. Of course,
What
you
does
must
that
have
mean?
good faith.
What does that mean?
You must have good faith. It means don't
Do
lie.
I pray?
Sorry?
Do I pray?
Pray?
This.
No. Good
All right.
faith. Good, not God. Good faith.
Okay.
No, good faith is you have to be honest and loyal and a good person. We would never write that in a contract. That's like saying, and I've seen this in Chinese contracts too, promise you won't break the law. In an American contract, we would never write that because, of course you can't break the law. I don't need to say it. So there are things that are implied that we need to know about. Statutory rights. Here's a word we learned right at the beginning of this class. Statute. What's a statute? Who can tell me? Carlotta, what's a statute?
I forgot now.
Tiffany, you remember what's a statute?
I don't know.
Chloe, you remember?
Or I don't.
3 strikes. All right. A statute is a government-made law. What's the opposite of a statute? Carlotta, what's it called when we have a law that's not made by the government? It's made by the court.
Court law?
It's not called court law. That's a pretty easy guess. Common law, right? We talked right at the beginning of this course about how America and England are common law countries and China is a civil law country. And then we talked about how sometimes the law is made by the government and those are called statutes. And then how sometimes the law is made by the court and that's called common law. So there are some rights for employees that the government has given. Notice is how quickly do you need to tell your boss if you're going to quit the job, or if the boss wants to fire you, how much time do they need to give you? Forms of dismissal is how do you fire someone or quit? And then equal pay and discrimination we'll just get to if we have time. This class is concerned with business law. Those are a little bit more of HR issues. But let's start with written particulars. So we talked about respondeat superior in agency law and how to tell if someone is an employee. So a contract of employment is a contract. So it's a contract. It doesn't have to be in writing. It could be oral. We understand that there are both express terms, things that are written in the contract, and implied terms, things that are not written in the contract. So the written particulars are the terms and conditions. You must get them within 2 months of starting employment. This is not the contract. It's just the terms and conditions. But if your boss doesn't give you this information, you can sue the boss. So what kind of information are we talking about? You know, if I said, let's say I want to hire Jody. Hey, Jody, I want you to teach at my school. And it's all legal. I have a license to run a school. Everything's legal. And I make a contract with you and it says, Jody agrees to teach at David's school starting December 15th for 1 year. I'll pay you 10,000 RMB a month. You'll work 40 hours a week, teaching 20 hours and preparing 20 hours in the office. So 40 hours a week. Let's say I'll give you 20,000 a month. I'll make it better. Give you 20,000 RMB a month, and I'll give you basic healthcare, and I'll provide you with a visa. And I write the address of the school, and then we sign it. Is that a good contract? Jody, how do we know if a contract is good? When I say good, I mean valid, legitimate, enforceable, binding.
Sorry, I forgot, sir.
Well, the test is pretty soon, so you better start to remember. Nicola, can you tell me, how do we know if a contract is valid?
We know if you mean by the contract law.
Yeah, by contract law.
Okay, so we can say that when there is an offer and acceptance, and they are binding. One part promise, the other part promise.
So,
They accept.
okay, we need the offer and acceptance, but we also need consideration.
Yes, so
We also need intention. We also need certainty.
yeah, but by those terms here, I think there is a contract.
Sure, there's a contract, right? There's offer, acceptance, consideration, intention, and certainty.
What they do, yes.
So let's say that Jody starts working at my company, and the office location was at Jing'an Temple. It was around there. And Jody, during the first week, I say, oh, by the way, Jody, Mondays and Wednesdays, you're here at Jing'an Temple. Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, you're working out in Pudong, very far out in Pudong. And the contract that we signed, it didn't say like, it said 40 hours a week, but it didn't say the hours. Actually, the hours are 5 a.m. They start. You need to be here at 5 a.m. Can I say these things?
It wasn't in the contract, this.
Yeah, but I mean,
It's
he didn't
depend.
ask.
It depend. It depend.
Depends on what?
Because on the nature of the contract, because there is a notion of fairness.
Yeah, but what's unfair? I mean, Jody could have asked if he wanted to know these things.
I think you could ask him to do it as, I don't know, like, could you be there at 5 a.m.? Maybe yes, maybe not, but I don't think you could enforce him to be there if not in the contract. Because you didn't
So
make
this
it clear
is
in the contract.
this is where the written particulars or the terms and conditions comes into play. So could I say these things? Yes, I could. I could. Don't sign a contract until you've seen the terms and conditions. And if Jody doesn't like it, I'm not asking him to do anything illegal. I'm not asking him to do anything unethical. He didn't ask. I have 2 months to give him these written particulars. Now, these would have all that information. And you do not need to know everything for the test. You need to know what a written particular is, or you need to know that you need 2 months. You have 2 months as a company to give terms and conditions, but you don't need to know all the details. But this would have told Jody, what if I told him that we only pay using PayPal to an American bank? Okay, I'm the master of the contract. I made the offer. I can make any offer I want. Jody accepted it without asking. But when are the holidays? Now, I can't break the law. So I can't say you have to work during Golden Week or National Day. Those are government holidays. I cannot break the law. But in terms of the place of work or pension information or any disciplinary rules, could I say, if you come late once, you're fired? I do not accept people coming late. Sure, I could.
You can.
Yeah. You don't like it, don't take my job or negotiate with me, but I can because I'm the master of the offer. So this information is really important. And I don't need to give it to you on the first day. I have 2 months to give it to you.
Sorry, David.
Yeah,
It's not clear to me. You can have a contract with Jody or anyone, but the written particulars, you can give it to him after he signed the contract. You have 2 months to do it, to give it to him.
Yep.
Is it?
The contract is formed before the written particulars are given.
Before.
So he and I could have an agreement and we shake hands or we sign a contract and he now works for me and I have 2 months to give him these. Now, if I don't give it to him, then he can go to the court, go to the tribunal and demand it. And he can get a payment. He can get 2 to 4 weeks pay and a demand that I have to give him the particulars, the terms and conditions. But your company is not required to give this to you. Now, of course,
So
they can't. Yeah.
Sorry. No, because I'm thinking, because your example is particularly special, because like in case of judges coming from Indonesia to China to teach in your course, and if he has the written particulars, maybe he didn't agree with this part of the contract. So is your company obliged to pay like his traveling back if he don't like it, if he don't agree with the written particulars?
Not if our written particulars or the terms of our job are reasonable. If it's totally unreasonable, then he could go to court and say, this is totally unreasonable. You had to tell me that this was the job, and since you didn't tell me, you have to fly me back to my country. But let's say that I am in China, and Jody, where do you live right now?
Indonesia.
Indonesia.
Right. Okay, so you're in Indonesia and I'm in China, and I hire you to be a teacher, and you sign the contract. You don't ask me any other questions. You just say, when do I start? And I say, okay, you start on December 20th. And you say, okay, I send you the ticket. You fly to China. And I say, welcome, Jody. Welcome to Shanghai. Okay, here's the deal. This is a night job teaching. Okay, you're teaching during American afternoon hours online. So you're going to be teaching from 1 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm sorry you're not happy about that. And then Jody says, well, no, I'm not going to do that. You need to pay to fly me back to Indonesia. I would say, no, I don't. You could have asked the hours of the job. You didn't ask. It's not, there are lots of people around the world work at night. I'm not asking you to do anything unreasonable. This is just something you don't want to do, but you didn't ask. You always need to ask.
Coach Georgie.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I notice it's so different from when you give an offer, and before to buy a car or to accept an offer, you have to provide all of the information, because it's like now there is a room for misunderstanding or misconception about the offer or the contract. And with this opportunity, I think a lot of traps and tricks are allowed.
I mean, caveat emptor means, in Latin, means buyer beware. So if you want to come to my store and buy a car, when you say, I need to tell you everything, I don't. I can't lie to you, of course. And you say, if you ask me a question, I have to answer it to the best of my ability. David, is this car 4-wheel drive? Oh, no, it's only 2-wheel drive. Is this car, does it come with radio? Yes, it comes with satellite radio. You know, I have to answer the questions. But what if you don't ask me anything about the gas mileage? And then you buy the car, and then you discover that it uses gas very quickly. Can you return it to me and say, you should have told me? Not really. You could have found out on the internet. You could have asked me. Why do I have to, what, should I educate you into everything about the car? That's not my job. If you didn't ask, you didn't ask. So I don't think that I have to tell you everything. I would say with selling a thing, a good, an object, there are higher standards because of things we learned, like Lord Atkins' neighbor test. So that anybody who's going to use something, drink a beer or use a car, the company, the manufacturer, has a duty of care to make sure that any user doesn't get hurt. So because of the torts laws, objects do have a pretty high standard that they're probably going to be pretty good. And if they're not, the company will usually replace it or do something because there's a duty of care. There's no real duty of care with jobs like that. This wouldn't be a tort. This would just be a contract that Jody didn't ask the right questions about. So there are, though, things that are in the contract that you don't have to ask about. Just like with a car, you do not need to ask, does it drive? You don't need to ask that. Of course it drives. It's implied that if I'm selling you a car, it drives. And there are things that are implied also in an employment contract. So there are certain responsibilities. For example, for the employer, let's go to the employer first. I am hiring Jody. When Jody comes to China, can I call him names and insult him? No. Can I then say, well, Jody, you never asked me, are you going to call me names? You never said that you didn't want me to call you bad names. So you come to China and then I call you bad names. Can I do that? No. Can I say when Jody gets to China, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, there's no work for you? No. I have an obligation to provide work. I have an obligation to pay. I have an obligation not to reveal his information. I have an obligation to indemnify him. What is indemnify? Yeah.
When someone made a mistake, you pay him indemnity. It's like you pay him for the mistake that he did. It's kind of remedy.
It could be a mistake, but it also could just be an expense or a cost. So let's say that Jody works for my English school and I have a new teacher coming, Ploy. Ploy is my new teacher. And I say, hey, Jody, can you go to the airport in Shanghai and meet Ploy and bring her back here for her training? And Jody says, okay. So Jody goes and gets a taxi and goes to the airport. And Jody said, can I take a taxi? And I'm like, yeah, do whatever you want. So he takes a taxi to the airport. He gets Ploy with all of her luggage, gets a taxi and brings her back. And then Jody gives me the receipts for the taxi. Do I need to pay Jody back? Yes. That's indemnification also. Now, if Jody made some sort of mistake, and this gets into vicarious liability, that idea. Let's say that Jody is in class and he accidentally spilled some ink on a boy's very expensive jacket. That's a tort, right? That's negligence. And so would Jody need to pay? Yes, because he has a duty of care as the teacher. Would I need to pay? Maybe, because that's vicarious liability. So when you say a mistake that I need to pay for, I think you're talking about a vicarious liability situation. Indemnity is just to pay for the employee if they incur an expense, as long as it's reasonable. Of course, when Jody comes to China, I can't make him work in a dangerous place. It's got to be reasonably. Now, the contract doesn't need to say that. Even if the contract doesn't say it'll be a safe office, of course it has to be a safe office. So these are the things that we would consider in America to be sort of obvious. It doesn't need to be said, but they're in the contract anyway. Now, for the employee, what kind of things are implied? The contract doesn't need to say it. You still can't accept bribes. You still have to obey your reasonable orders. You still have to use reasonable care. You still have an obligation of good faith or trust. You still can't reveal confidential information. I mean, these things they're kind of obvious, right? I would say all of this could easily be summed up by saying good faith. You have to have good faith. That's pretty much what it comes down to. One other thing that's implied. Now, what if I told Jody, I told you that the job was 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., normal working hours. And then you come to China and I say, oh, Jody, there's been a change. Now it's 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. It's shifted. Can I do that, Jody?
No, because it's not what I accept in the contract.
Correct. Now, if I wanted to do that, both parties, you and I, must agree to the change. This is also implied that one party cannot unilaterally by himself change the terms of a contract. So if I tried to change the terms of the contract, then the contract becomes voidable. So if you come to China and I said, oh, your working hours have changed, now the contract has become voidable and you could sue me. You need to agree to that. Now, what about the statutory rights? The rights that the government has given? Anybody Can anybody name a right that the government gives employees?
Sorry.
What's a right that the government gives employees? All employees get something.
Social right.
What do you mean?
I don't know how to say it in English, but it's like we all is okay. For example, holidays. Every employee has this right in this right.
Yes. Okay, the government gives you holidays, that's true. So some other rights, the biggest right probably that the government gives people is called maternity. And that means if a woman is pregnant or having a baby or adopting a baby, they can take time off of work, they get paid, and then when they're done, they can come back. And you can't give away their job. That's pretty much the biggest statutory government right. So it's different in different countries. In the UK, all female employees can get 52 weeks leave. That's a year. And that's regardless of how long they have worked for the employer. Now, this rule is true in China too. You guys probably wouldn't see this because you're still students, but when I worked in TV stations in China or in schools too, you would have a lot of young women who would take the job when they were like, 22 or 23 and immediately get pregnant. They were waiting until they had a government job in order to get pregnant because now they could take a year off of work. Well, actually in China, you can't take a year, but a lot of people wait until they have good maternity leave because in the UK, you get paid for 39 weeks. That's a lot of payment. Now, before we go on, let me ask a big question. Isaac, why? Let's say I have this English school and an employee comes to my school, a woman, and she gets pregnant. I have to pay her for 39 weeks. She can take a year off of working, and then when she's ready, she can come back. This is terrible for my business, right? I would just want to replace her. Why in the world do we have this law? Isaac?
Why do we have this law?
Yeah, this is crazy, right? Well, I'm a business owner. Why do I have to pay someone for 39 weeks who's not working now?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
All right. Tiffany?
Can I answer?
Nicola? Who said something?
Jody.
Jody. Okay, Jody, tell me why we have this.
Like to protect the human rights?
To protect human rights? Maybe. I don't know. I'm just a guy who runs an English school, man. I'm not trying to violate human rights. This is killing me. This woman took the job and then got pregnant. I have to pay her for 39 weeks and I can't replace her permanently. But okay, maybe human rights. Tiffany, tell me, you're a girl. Come on, tell me why you think we have this rule.
I actually think it's just for society to have more babies. I honestly think.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's for society to have more babies, but not. I'd be clear. It's not just society. It's in this case, it's the UK. The UK wants more citizens. Just look at, China wants citizens. America wants citizens. They want citizens. They want their citizens to be healthy and well raised. The UK has a very big government interest in having healthy, well-raised citizens. I get a benefit by opening a company and doing business in the UK. I have the benefit of the police, the laws, the courts, the roads, the sewers, all kinds of things. And something I have to give back is I have to help the government with their program to make more healthy citizens. So yeah, that is what it is. right? So the government is willing to pay some of this. I don't have to pay. I might have to pay part of it, but the government actually will pay. And you don't get 100% of your salary. You get 90% for the first 6 weeks, or 90% of your average weekly earnings for the next 33 weeks. So it doesn't matter if you know like this, you know, the money, the rules, but you don't get your full salary, and the government will help pay. America has the worst policy. This is not surprising to anybody anymore, that America has the worst policy in the entire world for developed countries, which is that a woman can get 12 weeks unpaid leave. Now, most companies will give better benefits than that. Like if you work for, you know, a big company in America, you're going to get a better thing than this government rule, because that's awful. Truly, that's awful. I mean, England gives you a year and America gives you 3 months. England pays you for 39 months and America pays you for 0, right? America gives such bad benefits. China, not that much better. China has the absolute minimum that allows them to meet the International Labor Organization. So in China, you get 14 weeks, a little better than America.
America is none, 0.
No, in China, I think you do get a payment.
No, America, USA.
What about USA?
0 for a woman worker in a company. She's pregnant. She need to go. How much do they pay her? 0?
Yeah, 0.
0.
Yeah, 0. Like 1 minus 1. 0.
But even the company is not paying, not government nor the company.
My understanding is the government pays 0 and the company is free to pay if they want to. And companies often do pay. Look, I mean, this was the whole point in part. I don't want to get into a political discussion, but part of the point of America was that states should have more power than the big federal government. That was part of the idea of America, right? And so the big federal government, they wouldn't pay, because why should they? New York State could, or California State could, or the company could. I mean, that's the point. The point is not to have a big socialized government, even though we do. It doesn't work, but I mean, that was the original point. So yeah, the government doesn't pay anything. In China, they do pay. Now, you guys can just wait a little in China, because if you're older than 24 in China, that is called late childbirth. And if you have late childbirth, because you're older than 24, then you get an extra maternity leave, because you're an old woman, because you're 25 years old, and you get the 98-day leave, which is longer. And it's actually different in different places in China, but yeah, always been kind of humorous. Now, in addition to the mother getting time off, so does the father. You know, that's called paternity. Paternity is much shorter. So China is 2 weeks. You know, America also, it's just very short. And it's usually not paid. Some places it is. And again, if you have a late childbirth, then you get 10 days, which is the old regulation was you only got 3. Now you get 10 days. Still not great, but okay. So that's the first big government thing that we give to employees. The second one is called minimum wage, right? Minimum wage, that's of course a government rule. There's no rule that, there's nothing in the Constitution that says what the minimum wage is. A company could pay as little as people will accept, but the government has set the minimum wage. Now, minimum wage is different in different countries, different in different states. In New York, I think it was $12, something like that. They're trying to push it up to 15. In other places in America, it's like $7 or $8, really barely living wages. China, their goal was to increase it a little more than 10% a year. It's still pretty low. Monthly, this was 2014 was the Oh no, I have 2018 too. 2014, this was the minimum wage in Shanghai, which was the highest in China, was 19 per hour. That's Shanghai is by far the highest in China, and that was 19. So there are other places in China that's like 10 RMB an hour. So consider that, you know, as foreigners, when you guys, what do you make, you know, 100 RMB or more per hour to teach English, or you do some job and, you know, that's 10. If you're earning 100, and look, I don't get out of bed to teach English for less than 300, you know, like you're earning more than 10 times what a lot of factory workers make in China. You know, it is important to know how much people are really making. Now that was 2014. 2018, it was raised up to 21 RMB per hour. But you know, that's the highest, right? The lowest in China, when I checked in 2018, was 11. That was Heilongjiang.
It's
And
Harbin.
Where is it? Where is it? In the north, right?
yeah,
Harbin,
real
yeah.
cold. Yeah, that's where Harbin is. Real cold, a lot of coal mining. You know, that's what coal miners make. Like
But
heavy work
sir,
in the mines.
I have a question. For example, in Shanghai, I don't think like half of the people living in the city have the minimum wage in Shanghai. I don't think this. Maybe it's true. Maybe I don't know. But I
You
don't
think
think
they're
it's-
earning more, you mean?
Yes.
Or less?
Well, so basically what I'm saying is like the minimum, the law put this minimum. So this is the least that you can earn per hour in Shanghai. But I think compared to the population of Shanghai, like so many people are
I mean,
above.
there's a lot to unpack if we get into this subject. I'll say, for example, I have a good friend who was a crossing guard. So he's a
Crossing
Chinese.
guard.
Yeah, he's the guy who stands on the corner and says go or stop, or he's not a
Yeah, yeah.
police. He's a crossing guard. It's a government job. He never went to college. I know him because he's a poet. He's a great poet. And he earns 2,500 RMB a month. That's a standard government salary. He and his wife and his daughter live in one room that's a lot smaller than this room. They all sleep in the same bed. They share a bathroom with 3 other families that's under the stairs with no heating. They share a kitchen. It's very dirty. It's in Shanghai, you know, but it's not nice. That's very common. In fact, I have a friend who does these specialized tours of Shanghai called insider tours, where they show you things that nobody else sees and stuff. And I forget the statistic, but it was something like, I forget how, there are tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands who live in Shanghai with no running water or bathrooms.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. Because a lot of this had to do during the Cultural Revolution. So there's a common a sentiment in China that if you are from Shanghai, you are rich. Because even though you may not have money, the government gave you an apartment or something in the 1960s. And that apartment is now worth millions of dollars. So a lot of people, they sort of have money in the sense that they own an apartment. And occasionally they'll flip it. They'll sell the apartment and then buy 2 smaller ones somewhere. Or if the government knocks down your apartment, they will pay you eminent domain money. And usually, and this is a difficult situation in China, here's what they do, like in America, let's say they want to tear down my house. They will look at the property values and everything, and they will give me the value. And I can negotiate, but they'll give me the value. And that's it. Now in China, they have a different system. In China, if they want to knock down your apartment or your house because it's old, and they do this a lot in the old areas of Shanghai, the hukou, the old alleys are being all demolished. If they want to knock it down, they will give you the opportunity. Let's say you have 50 ping fong, 50 square meters is your place. Well, that's pretty small. Let's say it's 100 square meters is your apartment. Now, when they knock it down, instead of giving you money, they're going to give you the option to buy a 200 square meter place in a new apartment that's being built there. They'll give it to you for free. But you need to build it yourself. I mean, they'll build the building, but the building is just concrete, right? You need to put in the floors and the walls and everything, the electricity, the plumbing. Now, if you have the money to do that, this is how a lot of people made money, because they tore down your old house. They gave you the opportunity to, have 3 different little apartments in the new buildings. Now you borrow money from the bank or from relatives. You build these 3 apartments, you sell 2 of them, or you have one, give one to your kids and sell one. Now with that money, go buy another apartment in a new building. And, people can start making money that way. But if you didn't have the money to build this new apartment, then you get nothing. I mean, you have an empty concrete space available to be built. So the best thing you can do is just sell that to someone else, but it's not worth very much because it's not built yet. So it's a little confusing, but the idea is $2,500 is a monthly salary for many government workers. Maybe now it's $2,600. There's no way it's up to $3,000 yet. So a lot of people earn like that salary. Standard salary for a Chinese college graduate who comes out of a university that's not, Beijing University or something. Standard salary is around 8,000, between 5 and 8. Smaller, Shanghai is around 8. If you go to like Chengdu, which is a big city, but it's not, I guess you call it a 2nd tier city, then you're going to get around 5,000 RMB per month. The highest level sort of manager, a basic manager in China will earn 20,000 a month. Now, that's with 20 years of work at a government company. Contrast that with the average foreigner who teaches English with a college degree, starts at 15. So you're talking about 20 years in an industry, becoming a manager to earn 20,000. A foreigner who went to a terrible school but happens to speak English walks in at like 15,000. So there really is a pretty big difference. Now, some of the other differences are foreigners have almost no benefits, no social security, pensions, 401k, retirement, things like that, social welfare. Some of that's being changed, but part of your benefits package as a Chinese person is you do get a lot of benefits like that. In terms of time work. Yeah.
Sir, is this wage flat to the citizen and also like the foreigner?
No, these are not flat rates. People can pay whatever they want. I'm just telling you kind of the going rate. If you got a job working at one of the chain schools, EF, Disney, Kid Castle, any of these big chain English schools, then you're going to earn between 13 and 15 to start, 13,000 to 15,000 per month to start. You'll never get above 20. You could work there for 10 years. Now, what can happen is you go up the ladder and you get trained, but they don't have foreigners really being high-level managers, not in those kind of Chinese-owned companies. To get above that kind of salary, you need to work in a foreign company, not a Chinese company. So your wages are, it's not capped, but you're never going to get above a certain amount, sort of as an English teacher. You'd have to go to a foreign company. But Chinese people, yeah, they start a salary much, much, much lower. Really, really significant difference. Working time regulations, you don't need to know this, just the idea that the government does set rules on how many days you can work. China doesn't follow these, right? These are British rules. China doesn't really follow them. Anybody ever hear of the 996? Rule in China? That's something Jack Ma had said. He said he believed that employees should work 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. And everybody kind of went crazy and said, then you're telling us we have no time to see our families. It's 996. That's crazy. But that's, Chinese people do work a lot of times the 996 hours. Grievance procedures. You don't need to know this either, but for the final, but the point is the government has statutory rules about how you complain if you have a problem at work. A company can't just say, oh, if you have a problem, we're not going to do anything. The government has made procedures. So if you have a problem at work, you can complain to a manager. If it's about the manager, then you can go up to the manager's manager. You must be allowed to have a formal meeting to discuss this. You cannot, the company cannot have unreasonable delay. They can't wait 6 months to discuss the grievance. The employee may be accompanied, which means you could bring a lawyer, or you could bring a friend just to support you. What I want to talk about, which I do think is very important, is notice. So notice is how early does the boss need to tell you if you're fired? Or how early do you need to tell the boss if you're going to quit? So the first thing to understand is whatever your contract says, that's the rule. But the government provides a minimum. There's no real maximum. It just has to be reasonable. So for example, most teaching contracts say you must, if you want to quit a school, you need to give 3 months notice or the end of the semester. Now that's a very long time in business contracts, 3 months. But for schools, it makes sense because they don't want someone, a teacher, to quit in the middle of the semester. They want to say, look, you can quit if you want, but you have to wait until the end of the semester or 3 months because we need time to replace you. Most business contracts are not 3 months. Most contracts are usually a month notice. But the government does provide a minimum, and the minimum is very short. So if you're an employee and your boss wants to fire you, according to the government, if you've worked less than 2 years for this company, they only need to give you 1 week notice. Now, if the company wants to fire you, if the contract says 1 month, 1 month. If it says 2 weeks, 2 weeks. If it says 3 months, 3 months. But if it says nothing, 1 week. But what this means is the boss could not fire you today, right? The boss can't come in and say, that's it, Isaac, you're out, pack your bags, you're leaving today. Today's your last day. They can't do that. Now we'll learn in a few minutes, probably after our break, we'll learn how you fire someone. And when you do that, if you say, Isaac, you're fired today, that's unfair dismissal. And you can sue the company. You could sue me for doing that. But if I want to say, Isaac, you're fired, the contract doesn't say anything, I'm giving you 1 week notice. That's okay. I can give you 1 week notice. Now, if you've worked for me for 3 years, it's 1 week per year. So 3 years, you get 1 week plus 1 week per year. 3 years, you get 2 weeks. 4 years, 3 weeks. 5 years, 4 weeks. 10 years, 9 weeks. The maximum is 12 weeks. That's for me firing you. What if you want to quit my company? If you want to quit my company, you need to tell me also 1 week. But again, whatever the contract says, that's the rule. And if the contract says nothing, then it's 1 week.
Is it for all of the industry?
In America, yes. In England, yes. In China, it's a little different. In China, it's not 1 week. China is actually quite a lot better. The reason is, so Chinese law is going through a period of development right now, for good and bad. One of the good things is that Chinese law is becoming more and more focused on protecting workers. Now, I will say if you live in a small town or a small city, and good luck enforcing this, but in Shanghai or Beijing or Shenzhen or, Chengdu or Guangzhou or any big city, the worker is protected. And in China, you have 30 days, not 1 week. If, however, if you're in the probation period, then no, then only 3 days. But if they want to fire you in China, they need to give you 30 days written notice, which is Great. I mean, that's a lot better than England and America.
This is when you sign for a long-term contract. Yeah.
Any contract.
Because like sometime I will say, I think I get fired like 4 times in my life. They always told me at the last minute. And it's like common because they think you're gonna do something against them, maybe rob them or steal
I mean,
them. So they told you at the last minute.
that if you're talking about in France, that is illegal. You know, most people don't know what to do about it. And most people don't, you know, you're not going to go get a lawyer because it's not worth it. But you don't really need one. You can go to an employment tribunal and just say, I was fired at the last minute without notice. And as I said at the beginning of this class, and as I said, the final exam is essentially going to be a story, and I want you to write the legal letter, you know, but this is what I want you guys to know is that if a company did that to you now, the first thing to do would be to write a letter to their HR department or their probably their HR, but to their manager HR saying, you know, you go online, you look at the French law for notice, dismissal notice, and you find out what the rule is, and you say, according to French civil law, employment law, Article 6, you know, subsection 3.1, it said you must give 30 days. I was fired, you know, with only 1 day notice. Therefore, you have broken my employment contract. And unless I am paid, I am going to take this to court. I mean, it's the first thing to do. Find the law, write the letter. But as I said on all of your exams, you have to tell them the law first. You can never tell them the facts first. And the reason I say that is if you do that, they know you don't know what you're talking about, because a lawyer would never do that. A lawyer would never say, because that's emotional. Emotional people tell the story of what happened first. Like, dear manager, I can't believe you fired me. I've worked here for 10 years. I already know that you don't know what you're talking about if you did that.
Yeah. Of course, you're right. Yeah, I think
lawyers don't write like that. Lawyers are totally cold. You know, dear sir or madam, the law says this. Here's the evidence. Pay me. Like, it's just cold.
Yes,
so
you're
in
right.
China, 30 days notice. Chinese can use payment in lieu of notice. In America and the UK, you can't. But payment in lieu of notice generally means that instead of giving you 30 days, like let's say I want to fire Isaac today and my company's in China. And I say, Isaac, listen, we're going to fire you. And it's, you know, it's not your fault. We just don't need the teachers. Rather than give you 1 month notice, I'd rather just pay you a month's salary right now. And I'll give you that extra month's salary and then you leave and today's your last day. That's called payment in lieu of notice, right? Payment instead of notice. And if Isaac says yes, okay. Now, the only thing you need to know is it has to say in your contract that they can do that. Like when you sign the contract. So when I am the boss and I made this contract with Isaac, I would have written payment in lieu of notice is okay. You know, the idea of the modern contract labor law in China is to make it easier for employees to get out. Because one of the biggest problems was Chinese employees couldn't get out of their contracts. Or their boss would say, if you quit, you have to give me 2 years notice, or else you have to pay me 6 million RMB. Or, I mean, these crazy things. And people were really in terrible situations. So China has changed a lot of their laws. Now, I said the government gives us minimums, but what about maximums? So here's an example. Arnold is the CEO of a bodybuilding and weight company and a chain of gyms. His contract says that if he's terminated, he must be given 2 years notice. So recently they decided to fire him and they gave him 2 months notice, do you think 2 years notice is reasonable?
It's almost impossible.
Seems
No.
almost impossible, right? Anybody think it's
Yes.
reasonable?
No, it's not reasonable.
It is reasonable.
2 years?
Yeah.
You plan to fire someone 2 years before and you let him 2 years.
That's not what makes it reasonable. Remember, back in contracts law, Could I sell you my brand new Ferrari for that shirt?
You say for that shirt or short?
Shirt, the shirt that you're wearing right now.
Oh, no, you cannot.
Why not?
It's kind of unfair.
No. You got to talk in the language of law. It's kind of unfair doesn't mean anything. Can I sell him? What area are we talking about? Offer, acceptance, consideration, intention, certainty. Nicola, what are we talking about here?
I think it's consideration.
Correct. Now, Nicola, explain the sentence to me. Consideration must be sufficient but need not be adequate.
Yeah. I have everything in my notes.
Okay.
In this case, it's not adequate. Adequate is the word. It's not adequate. Appropriate to the situation.
Consideration must be sufficient, but need not be adequate. Consideration must be valuable. Is the car valuable? Yes. Is your shirt valuable to me? Yes. I'm not asking you to pull some dirt out of the ground and give it to me. That shirt is something, it's valuable to me. I'm not asking for a pile of garbage, something that has no value. That shirt has value. Now, are these two things adequate? Are they equal? No, doesn't matter. Consideration doesn't need to be equal. When they made this contract, this is Shovey Downs, when they made this contract, there was a contract of employment which the company made, and it gave 30 months notice. You can make any contract you want. It's not unconscionable. Remember the terms of unconscionability. Wait, hold on for just a second. I'm in class right now. I'll call you right back. Okay, let's take a break now so I can call my friend right back. What time is
See
it?
you.
It's 8:26? All right.
Bye. See you.
Okay. I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, we are recording again. Ploy, Carlotta, Gentile, Isaac, come back if you can. So the next thing to talk about is restrictive covenant. I don't want to get into this too much, so I'd like to move pretty fast through this because this is a complicated area of law. The idea of a restrictive covenant is actually pretty easy. It is an exclusion clause. That's all it is. You know, it's an exclusion clause. So what does that mean, right? We learned an exclusion clause before that said, you know, I'm not responsible for something, right? So in this case, a restrictive covenant, covenant means like a sentence. Think of it that way. It's just a sentence in a contract that restricts something. So maybe it's easier to think of it as like, here I wrote, it's like a non-compete clause. So it's a sentence that says you can't do something. So for example, if I said, after you leave my, you know, I hired Jody to work at my English teaching school and I teach him, you know, English theater. And I say, after I leave, you can't work teaching theater English for 2 years. That would be a restrictive covenant. It's a sentence that restricts him from doing something. And as I said, it has to be reasonable. And it has to protect a reasonable business interest. So if you worked for a kindergarten, they couldn't just say you can't teach anywhere in China for the next 2 years. That's not reasonable. And it doesn't really protect their business interest. Typically, the only kind of restrictive covenants you guys would see would be non-compete. You know, you can't compete. If you leave my company, you can't go do the same thing for 6 months. If you leave my theater English company, you can't go teach theater English for a year. That's a non-compete clause. Non-solicitation means you can't steal my customers. Non-dealing means you can't have any contract with my customers or suppliers. I don't care if they came to you. You can't have any relationship with them. And non-poaching is you can't steal my other teachers. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be teaching. It could be any kind of business. If it was import-export, non-poaching is you can't steal the employees. Non-solicitation, you can't steal my customers. Non-dealing, let's say that I have an import-export company and I use a shipping company to ship things from China to America. I use a company called Neptune Shipping. And Tiffany leaves my company. You're an employee and you leave. You want to start your own import-export company. Now, if there's a non-competition, then you can't do that. Now, if there's non-solicitation, you could open your own company, but you can't steal my customers. If there's non-dealing, you can't even work with my stakeholders. So if I use Neptune Shipping, you can't. You know, even though they're not my customer, really, they're just somebody I work with. It doesn't matter. You can't work with. So if I had this like business model that's really good and Tiffany works for me and then you leave and I do not want you copying me at all, then I would put some of these in, right? But these are the basic restrictive covenants in employment.
What mean poaching?
Poaching means you can't steal the other employees. You can't call up, Tiffany couldn't call you up, Florian, and say, hey, Florian, I think you should leave David's company and come to my company. You know, it's not solicitation because solicitation is about customers. Poaching is about employees.
I have an issue with non-dealing covenant.
Yeah.
For the client who come to you to your store, just because you are a competitors and maybe the offer is better.
I don't care. You can't work with them because I did.
Okay. It's
In
like
fact,
as long as you sign the contract, you binded, right? So
Yes,
that's it.
if you agree to this, you are bound.
Yeah.
There's some interesting things that people do kind of in a shady way with non-dealing. So what here would be a bad suggestion if I was a bad lawyer. Let's say that you're going through a divorce. What I would tell you to do is, let's say, Florian, your wife and you are going to get divorced. I would say, Florian, this week, go to every single divorce lawyer you can find in Shanghai and tell them, you know, just an information meeting. Don't pay them, you know, just tell them like, I'm considering working with you. I'm going to get a divorce. I'd like to see what your price is, that kind of thing. Because once a lawyer has talked to you, they cannot deal with your wife. So here's what people do in divorce sometimes. They'll go in the first week and talk to every single lawyer they can find. So then your wife she'd never be able to find a lawyer because you dealt with them all.
So much work. Does it work really for real? Like,
Yeah,
there's so many lawyers, like you have 1 year to meet them. It's like all of
you
them.
go to the best. Just go to all the best ones.
Oh, maybe now it's different.
Yeah, but you think about like small city, maybe it's,
Yeah, if you're thinking of New York City or Paris, sure, it wouldn't really matter. But if you're
No
talking
way.
about even
Yeah.
Shanghai China doesn't have that many lawyers, actually. Okay. Now-
David, I have a question. This restrictive covenant is under notice, or this is a new thing?
This is
implied terms.
This is no, I guess this is a new thing. This is not an implied term. We only see restrictive covenants really in two areas. One is employment, and two is property. You see this with homes. So let's say that I'm selling you my home, but there's a beautiful rose garden in front of the home, and my mother, you know, used to spend her whole life taking care of those roses. And in the contract, it says, you must not take down the rose garden. That's the same idea. That's a restrictive covenant. You must not something. Okay, now I want to get to the most important. You'll see if you look at the PPT, there's something called garden leave. It's not something big. And I'm not going to test you on it. Garden leave just means if I fire, let's say I fire Jody today. But of course, I need to give Jody 1 month notice. But I don't want him to come to work. I want him to stay at home. That's called garden leave. Spend all or part of your notice period at home. So it's kind of a restrictive covenant because it says don't come in and don't get a new job. But here's what I want to get to now, forms of dismissal. This is what's important for me right now. I don't know why I highlighted this. I don't want it highlighted. But, oh no, come back. I just didn't want it highlighted. Okay, so this is the thing that I really want to cover now. I'd like to cover all of these, and I think that should be fine. Then there's only a tiny bit left to do, and then next week we can kind of focus on a review. Let me take a second and talk about the review before we get into this, because once we start this, I'm just going to go straight through this. What I'm going to do this week is I'm going to put on the content section of Blackboard some practice, like a practice contracts question, a practice torts question, not torts, I won't do torts, practice contracts, practice agency, practice company law, practice employment law, those four. And next week, we'll talk about the answers to them. So next week, I'm not going to just go through every subject and say, okay, look at the PPT, you need to know this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to answer the questions with you guys, essentially go through the practice exams. I'll also put on one practice actual final exam from a few years ago from this class, so you can see what it looks like. So next week, the plan is we go through all of those practice questions together. So take a look at them this week. I'll put them on in the next day or two, and then take a look at them this week. And then if you have any questions before next class, just let me know. Okay, now let's talk about the forms of dismissal. How do you fire somebody, or how do you quit? So first, this idea of what is dismissal. To dismiss somebody is to ask someone to leave, to terminate the contract with or without notice. That could be dismissal. So if the contract ends for any reason. Now, a contract could end just because it's over. If I have a 1-year contract with you, let's say you have a 1-year contract, it ends December 16th. Well, then you're dismissed, right? The contract ends. Or if you have some sort of unreasonable conduct. So these are the 3 ways for a contract to end. Either the employer ended it, or it naturally ended due to time, or you did something unreasonable. So if I have Jody as a teacher in my company and I want to fire Jody, and I want to fire Jody because recently he's been late to class a few times. Can I do that? Sure. That's called a fair dismissal. Now, to fire someone fairly, we need 3 things, okay? Number 1, we need a good reason. Could I fire Jody because I don't like his hair? Jody, can I fire you because I don't like your hair?
No.
No, it's not a good reason.
Only
Well,
if you have a, how do you say, dress code, standard code, and his hair is not.
maybe.
Yeah, the only case.
So we'll talk about the reasons. There's 6 reasons. We'll talk about those in a second. But I need a good reason. Number 2, I need to act reasonably. And act reasonably means after I said you're fired, I need to behave reasonably. So if I said, okay, Jody, you've been late every single day. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to give you notice, right? So let's say the contract says 1 month. So, okay, Jody, you've been late every day. I'm sorry. We're going to give you 1 month notice. Now, Jody, for the rest of the month, I need you to come in every day and clean the bathrooms. Now, if Jody is an English teacher, is it reasonable for me to tell him to come in every day and clean the bathrooms? Don't teach English, just clean the bathrooms and make coffee. No, it's not reasonable. And because I didn't act reasonably, now this fair dismissal has become unfair. So if the boss does not act reasonably, it becomes unfair. And this is an important idea of what is unreasonable treatment. You can't treat an employee in any unreasonable or unfair way. If I do that, then Jody could actually sue me using the employment tribunal. Forget about this 2 years rule. That's different in different countries, but he could sue me using the employment tribunal. I'll explain why there's a 2-year thing there in a minute. Here are the 6 reasons that you can fire someone, the 6 good reasons. Number 1 is capacity. And what that means is ability. You can always fire someone if they don't have the ability to do the job. So Jody is an English teacher, but it turns out he lied and he never passed his TOEFL, or he can't speak English as well as I need him to. Well, okay, then you're fired. You know, so if you work for me and you can't use the software, you just can't figure out PPT or Excel or whatever, okay, you just don't have the ability. You can always be fired because you don't have the ability to do the job. Number 2, conduct. So this would be kind of what Florian said if I had a dress code that said you must have your hair combed, or you must have, you must wear a suit, or whatever the dress code is. If you break that, that has nothing to do with your ability, that's your behavior. And behavior includes how you speak, how you interact with other people? Or do you litter? Can I fire someone for throwing garbage on the ground? Yeah, sure. We'll talk about this in a minute. It's the test for how do I fire someone. Is it reasonable? But sure I can. This is my business. Now, could I walk up to Jody if he threw garbage on the ground and say, Jody, you littered, you're fired right now, get out? No. I probably need to give him a warning. And then if he did it again, okay, you're fired. Redundancy. Redundancy number 3 just means we're downsizing. So if if my school has a branch in Suzhou and a branch in Hangzhou and a branch in Shanghai, what if Jody works at the Suzhou branch and business is bad and we're closing the branch? Okay. I mean, that's a legitimate reason to fire someone because you're downsizing. Breaking a law. So if Jody breaks the law, obviously I can fire him. He did drugs, or he hit someone or he stole something, sure, he's fired. Retirement age. Okay, you can fire someone if they've hit retirement age. And number 6 is pretty much just anything reasonable. You can fire someone for anything that's reasonable. But most things will kind of fall in pretty much number 1, 2, or 4. Either how they acted or behaved or their ability to do the job is most situations. Now, one thing about this idea of having a good reason to fire someone. Let's say, I'll leave Jody alone for a minute. Let's say I want to fire Carlotta. Carlotta, are you here?
Yes.
Okay. So Carlotta's a teacher and I want to fire Carlotta, but I don't have a good reason yet. I just get a bad feeling. I know something's wrong. So here's what I do. I say, Carlotta, you're fired because the students are complaining that you are not nice to them. And all the students are complaining. Now, that's not really true, Carlotta, but that's what I tell you. And I'm going to give you 1 month notice. Now, in the next month, I tell Junpyo, Tiffany, Isaac, hey guys, I want you to watch Carlotta. Something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but just watch her. And then after about 10 days, Junpyo sees her steal something. And I say, aha, that's it, Carlotta. You're now you're really fired. You're fired for stealing. Now, can I do that? Is that reasonable? This is called after discovered reasons. Now, Carlotta, why did I originally say you were fired?
You didn't have a reason. But oh yeah. You said the students don't like me.
Okay. Now, that's the reason I gave you. That's the reason when we go to court. Tribunal is, everybody know the word tribunal? We've talked about it before. I don't know if you guys remember. Tribunal is like a not formal court. Shanghai has them also. They're special courts that you go to where you don't need a lawyer, you don't need to wear a suit, you don't need to be trained in law. You can just go there and the judge will kind of, in a very casual way, I don't want to say very casual, but much less formal than court. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's less formal. So we use this specifically for employment law, contract law, and landlord-tenant law. If you have a problem with your landlord, don't go to court, go to a tribunal. You can always find them. They're in Shanghai also. If you need, I'll find, I don't know the Chinese word offhand, but yeah, you can go to a tribunal. So Carlotta could go to the tribunal and say, David fired me because he said the students don't like me, but David has no evidence. Now, Carlotta, if I say, no, I'm firing Carlotta because we have her on camera stealing, what's going to happen, Carlotta?
Like, I'm gonna say that like that evidence was after I got fired, so
yeah. Now that evidence still matters, right? Because it's good evidence. I mean, we can't forget about the evidence, and that evidence will matter when the judge decides what award to give Carlotta. So Carlotta, what would probably happen in this case is you would win, but you're not going to win any money because you did steal.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make the dismissal fair, but it does matter about the award. Now, if Carlotta, you say I targeted you because of your race or ethnicity or something like that, then actually you might get an award because it doesn't matter that you were stealing. The fact is I tried to fire you based on your race. You know, so we really do want to separate this after discovered reasons idea. So in general, this is how you fire someone fairly. You need to have one of these 6 reasons. You need to act in a reasonable way. And then you need to not use an after discovered reason. Okay, that's how you fire someone reasonably. Now, what if I fired Carlotta unfairly? Now, here's something we need to understand. There's 2 kinds of unfair dismissal that we're going to learn. There's what's called unfair, and there's what's called wrongful. And I might jump forward in the PPT to explain the difference first, because this is what I need you to know for the final exam is what's the difference between unfair and wrongful dismissal. The definition of these 2 is the same. I fired you unfairly. That's the definition. But there's a pretty big difference between these. And the biggest difference is that wrongful dismissal is common law and unfair dismissal is statutory. What does that mean? Junpyo, can you tell me what does that mean? Wrongful dismissal is common law and unfair dismissal is statutory.
So unfair one is statutory means that the government has already made the law.
Okay.
And wrongful one is about the so it's common law, so you have to look the law cases before it happened.
Well, I would say it comes from court cases.
Yeah, it comes from court cases. Right?
It's sort of judge-made law. And what that means also is that wrongful is much, much older. Unfair dismissal is new. And wrongful dismissal is like 100 years old. Now, you can always sue for wrongful dismissal. Wrongful dismissal, so let me jump forward to the differences between these 2, unfair versus wrongful. So unfair is statutory. Now, because it's statutory, there are some real differences because the government made this law. It is easier to win unfair dismissal. But there are some rules. So it's easier to win unfair dismissal, but number 1, for unfair dismissal in America, you had to work for me or for the company for 1 full year. If you only work for 6 months, you can't use it. If you only work for 3 months, you can't use it. It has to be at least a year to use it. That's one big difference. Wrongful dismissal, it doesn't matter. You could work for 1 day. You could still sue me with this. So for the common law, wrongful dismissal, one difference is the amount of time. Common law has no time limit. Statutory is 1 year. That's one difference. Another difference is the remedies. Wrongful dismissal has common law remedies. That means it's the same as torts, it's the same as contracts. There's damages and there's equitable remedies, injunctions, damages and injunctions. We learned this in torts, right? There's direct damages, there's indirect damages. That's it. It's exactly what you've seen before because torts and contracts are both common law. The statutory, because the government made it, it has its own rules that I'll tell you in a minute about remedies. So number 1 difference is time. Number 2 difference is remedies. Number 3 difference, burden of proof. Burden of proof means who has the responsibility to prove it? Let's say that I say that, I'll go to Ploy. Ploy, are you there? Ploy.
Hi, sir.
Hi, Ploy. Hey, Ploy, I
Yes.
go to the police and I say, Ploy killed my best friend. Now, do I have to prove that you killed my best friend, or do you have to prove that you didn't?
Both. You have to prove that you believe that I killed your best friend, and I have to prove that I didn't kill.
Ah, no.
It depends in which court, I
No?
think.
You are innocent until proven guilty.
It depends in which court.
Oh,
No.
right.
It does not depend on which court. I mean, unless you're saying China versus America.
Yeah,
China,
yeah,
it's a little different.
yeah.
But in all common law countries, you are innocent until proven guilty. You do not have to prove anything. The government has to prove you did this. The government has to prove that you killed someone. The government has the burden of proof. Okay? The person who has to prove something has the burden to prove it. Now, for unfair dismissal, who has the burden of proof?
The master.
The employer, yeah. This is great for you. So let's say that I fire Jody and Jody goes to the tribunal, and Jody's worked for me for 2 years. So he goes to the tribunal and says, David fired me unfairly. Now I have to prove that I did not do that. I have to prove that I fired him fairly. That's very hard for me to prove. You know, so Jody might win. However, for wrongful dismissal, burden of proof is on the employee. That's hard. Now, if you want to sue the boss for wrongful dismissal, you have to prove that the boss fired you unfairly. So number 3, the big difference is burden of proof. Number 4 difference is where you go to court. So for unfair dismissal, you're going to the tribunal. And for wrongful dismissal, you're going to the court. Okay, these are the differences. So looking here, the differences between wrongful and unfair. Wrongful dismissal is common law. Wrongful dismissal has no time requirement. Wrongful dismissal, the burden of proof is on the employee. Wrongful dismissal goes to court. Wrongful dismissal has common law remedies. Those are the differences. Unfair dismissal is statutory. Unfair dismissal has 1 year. Unfair dismissal burden is on the employer. Unfair dismissal goes to tribunal. Unfair dismissal has government remedies. So we'll review that next week to make sure you understand. And let's now go back to unfair dismissal. So here's where we were. Okay, so unfair dismissal in America, you have to work for 1 year. In England, you have to work for 2 years. You know, China's also 1 year. So, and only employees can use this. Independent contractors cannot. So unfair dismissal says you were fired unfairly and you worked for at least 1 year or something. Now, how do we know? What's the test for this? How do we know if something's unfair? Let's say that in my company, Jody he threw some garbage on the ground. Okay, I was walking through the office and I saw Jody eat a candy bar and take the wrapper and throw it on the ground. And I walk over and say, Jody, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you your 1 month notice. You're fired. And Jody says, what? You can't fire me. I just threw something on the ground. I'll pick it up. And I say, no, man, you didn't respect my office and therefore you're fired. I'm giving you 1 month notice. Is that okay? So here's what the court says. The test we use is called the band of reasonable responses. That's the name of the test. And what the court said is there's a band, a range from totally unfair Just totally fair. And as long as the employer's reason for firing someone is inside this band, inside this range, then the court's not going to question it. Is there any other employer in the whole world who might fire someone for throwing garbage on the ground? Maybe. Therefore, it's probably reasonable. Now, could I walk up and say, Jody, I'm going to fire you because your name has 2 D's in it, and my name has 2 D's in it, and I only let one person work here with 2 D's in their name, so you're fired? No, that's too unreasonable. But you littered, you threw garbage on the ground? Maybe. So here was the case that showed us. I work as a security guard at a supermarket. Sometimes in the evening, we have what's called a go slow shift, where everything's just easy and relaxed. So during my shift, I was kind of lazing around and I forgot to lock a door. The next morning, the manager comes and he sees the doors unlocked and he fires me. And I say, this is totally unfair because it's just a small mistake. What do you think? What do you think, Ploy? Is this unfair?
From my own perspective, I don't think it's really unfair because you're working as a security guard at a supermarket, but then forgot to lock the door. That means thieves can go into the supermarket to steal stuff.
Sure.
That's a loss for the supermarket. So I think it's reasonable I'll be fired.
Okay, and that's the same thing the court said, right? That's what the court said. The court said this is fair. And they created this test. Now, you don't need to know all of this, but the important part is point 4. The court said there is a band of reasonable responses. A band means a range, just like rubber band. It's a range of reasonable responses where one employer might reasonably take one view, another employer might reasonably take another view. And it's only the court's job to find out, did the reason fall within the band of reasonable responses? So would some employers in the world think that you could fire someone for this? Sure. And therefore it is reasonable. Now, how about this? I work at FedEx delivering packages. I've worked there for 5 years. I usually work until 11 p.m., but recently my wife called and she told me she was sick. So I asked my manager if I could go home early at 7:30, and he said, okay. At 8:45, someone from work called the boss and said I was at a nearby bar drinking. So my boss called a couple people, said, go to the bar, look for David. But when they got there, I was gone. The next day, my boss tells me I'm fired. And I say, what? I say, man, I went into the bar to call a taxi. The taxi came. I went home. I have a note from the owner of the bar saying I called a taxi. I have a note from the taxi company saying I took a taxi. And my boss says, listen, David, I don't know who to believe. You say that you took a taxi home, but I sent some people to go and look for you. Somebody told me you were at the bar and I trust them. I don't know who to believe. You're fired. What do you think, Florian? Is this fair?
No, but I can say it different in which country. Maybe some country you can not with the case, but definitely in France, no. You need proof.
But
and
what
even
about
if you have the proof in French law, just because you didn't, okay, maybe it's true, a lie. The way you find out the lie, if you disregard or violate my human right.
But this isn't a human rights thing, man. Somebody was at the bar and saw you drinking. There's no human rights. There was no investigation. I didn't tell someone to spy on you. Nobody was spying on you. You know, Junpyo called me and said, hey, David, I see Florian at the bar. Why is he at the bar? That's it. That's what happened. Some guy saw you.
Does he have the proof? Does he have the proof?
No.
He can lie on me, so you cannot fire me from something like this.
So in America, we use the band of reasonable responses.
Band of
And-
reasonable response.
And that's the test. So this says, would any employer in the world, in America, maybe fire someone for this reason? Now, what if I really trust Junpyo? I've worked with Junpyo for 10 years. And he said, I saw Florian in the bar. Now, Florian shows me he has a note written by the guy who owns the bar. He has a note written by the taxi company. Man, I don't care. I trust Junpyo. And that's it. Would an employer in America believe this? Maybe. And the court's only job is to ask, is there any possibility that this is within the range of totally crazy to totally serious? And yeah, it's in that range. So this case is Post Office v. Foley. It is the exact same facts, although it's a British case. It's the exact same facts. And this person was supposed to stop at 11, but they stopped early. They went to go home to take care of their wife. And the line manager said, okay, he left it around 7:45. About an hour later, another manager said, I see this guy drinking at the pub, and called Mr. Joyce, the boss. And then, so the late shift manager sent 2 people, but then the person was gone. And I mean, you know, he said that he took a taxi and he went home and he has some notes, but who knows? And the court said, yeah, sorry, this is within the band of reasonable responses. So the only real question for an unfair dismissal is the reason completely unfair, totally crazy? No employer would ever do this. As long as it's a little bit reasonable, the court will accept it. So what you need to know is, for unfair dismissal, you must be an employee. In America, and I'll use the American rule, you must have worked for at least 1 year. You must have been unfairly fired. And you have 3 months to go to a tribunal. Those are the
So
rules
in this
for unfair
case,
dismissal.
who won in this case?
The boss.
Damn. Man.
Because who knows? I mean, yeah, you say you have evidence, you have a note signed by the owner of the bar, but maybe that's your friend. You have a note signed by the taxi driver. Maybe you paid him money to sign it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just don't know. But I know that Junpyo, who saw you, Junpyo is a manager here. And he's been a manager here for like 20 years.
Mm.
And now you're right. Maybe Junpyo has something against you. Maybe he does.
Actually, we don't have the factual proof, but
it's all circumstantial.
Yeah, his point of view,
And so the court says, because it's all circumstance, we don't know. And we're not going to say, did you break any rules? We're just going to say, we don't know, but we can understand why a boss might have fired you.
And I have a question. If the person find like a video or proof, can he sue the boss for saying, so you fired me for the wrong reason or something like this and get some remedy?
Sure. Damn. Sure, that would be unfair dismissal or wrongful dismissal. Again, and you would choose which one do you want. If you work for more than, no, you can't use both. You have to choose one.
Really?
Now, yes. Why would you choose this? Can anybody tell me why you would choose this?
I want to increase the remedy amount. So each.
Then you would not choose this. This is low remedy.
Can you add, for example, for this reason, plus this reason, plus this reason, then on top of it, the remedy go up and up?
So let's be clear. Why would an employee choose to use unfair dismissal, even though the remedies are lower? And I'll show you the remedies in a second. Why would somebody choose unfair dismissal? Can anybody tell me? We just talked about it.
Maybe because of the burden of the proof.
Okay, that's one big reason. Because in unfair dismissal, the employer has the burden of proof. The employer has to prove that he had a fair reason for dismissal. And that is hard for the boss to prove. And if the boss can't prove it, then the employee wins. That's one big reason to choose this, right? That's one big reason. Another reason to choose this is because you get to go to the tribunal, which is quicker. quicker and easier, faster, easier, less formal than going to court. Those are like the two big reasons to choose unfair dismissal. It's easier to win. However, you don't get as much money. So how much money do you get? Well, there are 3 remedies for unfair dismissal. This is statutory, so it's not the same as common law. There are 3 things you can get. Now, here's another reason you might choose unfair dismissal. If you choose wrongful dismissal, that's common law. So can you tell me, Isaac, what are the common law remedies? It's the same for torts, it's the same for contracts, and it's the same for wrongful dismissal. And I just said it. What are the common law remedies? No, Isaac, how about Tiffany?
Hello?
Hi.
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's not true. You do. What are the remedies in torts? This was task E. Wait. Go with Tiffany. Tiffany, in task E on the midterm, it talked about the remedies for torts. What were they? Think.
There were psychological, physical damages.
Okay. Damages.
Those were direct. But the indirect ones were like opportunities lost.
Okay, good. That's correct.
That's
correct. So there's direct and indirect damages. And then there was also one other thing. To get someone
Injunction?
to stop doing something. Yes, injunctions. Okay. Now, if you sue someone for wrongful dismissal, that's what you can get. Direct, indirect injunctions. That's it. That's common law. Now, what if, let me give an example where, let's say I am working at Microsoft and recently I was fired for being late. But I say it's not my fault. Their system, their computer system is broken. Every time I was here early, but the computer said I was late, but I can prove I was here early. Now, what if I don't want money? I want to keep working at Microsoft. This is a great job with a great salary, and I like my job. I don't want the money. I would not use wrongful dismissal. I would use unfair dismissal because the remedies could be reinstatement. I get to continue my job. What if I was fired, but it's because my boss didn't like me? And so my boss is Florian. Florian's my boss and he doesn't like me. And he says, David, you're fired because you were late. But I can prove that I wasn't late. It's just that he didn't like me. Now, I don't want to continue my job working with Florian. We don't get along. I want to work in another department. But I still want to work at Microsoft. Microsoft is huge. I just want to move departments. That's called re-engagement. I get a new job, same company. So these might be reasons that I would choose unfair dismissal, because these are totally different than damages. You can also get damages. You can also get that if you want, but it's limited. It's not as much money. Wrongful dismissal, if you're just talking about money, wrongful dismissal is definitely more money. Because in unfair dismissal, it's limited. It's limited to 3 kinds of money. Number 1 is called the basic award. The basic award, it's you get some money based on your salary, but it's not like wrongful dismissal. Wrongful dismissal, you could win anything. It's the jury. Think of the McDonald's coffee case. You know, her damages were not really, she didn't need $20 million, but the jury in a common law case, the jury can give anything. The jury can totally give millions of dollars. You know, what if somebody can prove that they were fired for a really bad reason? The jury might give millions of dollars. You definitely do wrongful dismissal. Basic award is basic. It's not a lot of money. So the basic award is the award for the loss of job security. You've lost your job. So it depends on your age. It depends on how long you've worked, and it depends on your week payment. So if I am like a 50-year-old man and I've worked there for 3 years, I'm not going to make very much money. You get more money if you're younger because you still have, like, if you're 25, you still have 40 years that you could work. If you're 50, you're going to retire pretty soon. So you get less money. So the money for unfair dismissal is less. Now, there is another kind of money given, though. This is called the Compensatory Award. This is the loss of earnings between the dismissal and the tribunal hearing. So let's say that I fire Jody. Okay, I say, Jody, that's it, you're fired, get out today. And Jody wants to sue me, and he wants to use unfair dismissal. So Jody, you go to the tribunal and you say, I want to sue David. And they say, okay, so it's going to take 6 months. We're very busy right now. It's going to take 6 months. Now, for the next 6 months, Jody, you can't take another job. You can't leave town. You got to kind of wait here. That's what this money's for. This is the money that you're going to lose because between when you were fired and when you go to the tribunal, you need to just sit around. You can't take another job yet. Why can't you take another job? Because maybe you're going to win and get the job back with me. And so you're losing money right now. So you can get that money back. And then also health and safety or whistleblowing. The difference between these two, there's no limit of damages for these. Health and safety is if you told the government that I'm doing something unsafe. Whistleblowing is if you told the government I'm doing something illegal. And in either case, there's no limit to damages because the government wants to know. They want to know if a business is not safe or if a business is doing something illegal. So you see the remedies for unfair dismissal are pretty different than wrongful dismissal. Now, there are some situations that are what's called automatically unfair. Automatically unfair is, of course, if I fire you for discrimination, right? It's automatically unfair to dismiss based on race, gender, religion, sexual orientation. That's automatically unfair. I could never fire you because of your race, your ethnicity, your gender, your sexual orientation, your religion, anything like that. But then there's a couple of other things that are automatically unfair. I could never fire someone because they're pregnant. I could never fire someone because they're in a union, not in China. China doesn't really have unions like that. Spent conviction. Let's say that I hire Jody to be an English teacher and he's doing a good job, but then recently someone told me that Jody went to jail once. He was in prison for 2 years for whatever, tax fraud. Now, can I fire Jody because I found out that he once went to prison?
Sometimes it depends which industry. If it's bank, you cannot, because when you fill the form for the bank to work at the bank, they say, "Did you ever?" I think it's felony. Ever get convicted of felony? So if they found out, you cannot go to the bank.
Right. So, but so that's true. A lot of jobs can ask if you committed a felony. Now, if I didn't know and then I found out, I can't fire him because he already served his time, right? The government gave him 2 years in prison. That was his punishment. He did it. Now he's done. Health and safety, and whistleblowing, again, I can't fire someone because they told the government my business isn't safe. The government wants to know. I can't fire someone because they told the government that I was not paying my taxes. You know, the government wants to know these things. Of course, I want to fire someone if they went to the government and said this about me, you know, but I can't. Or any sort of statutory right, the right to minimum wage, the right to maternity, paternity, the right to get married. There are all of these rights that we have. You know, and if I try to break your right, then I can't fire you for that.
So just to make clear, if you complain about the health and safety in the company to the government and then your employer fired you, this is like the unfair dismissal.
Yes.
Okay.
As long as, for unfair dismissal, as long as you've been working for 1 year or more. If you haven't, you can still sue them. Let's say that you found out that they were pouring, pollution into the local ocean or the local river, and it's affecting the water, and you went to the government and you told the government, and then the company fired you for doing that. Now, even if you've only been working for 1 day or 2 days, you can still sue them, just not for unfair dismissal. You need to use wrongful dismissal. So wrongful dismissal is, as we said, common law. This is another way of saying breach of contract. It's just breach of employment contract. But it is a breach of contract. So, it's where the employer breaks the employment contract. That's it. But in this case, the employee has to prove it. So that's harder because Nicola would have to prove that the company fired him because he went to the government. What if the company says, no, we fired Nicola because customers don't like him? And Nicola says, that's not true. I have a good relationship with the customers. I went to the government and said you were pouring pollution into the river. That's why they fired me. And then I bring in some customers and they say, oh yeah, we don't like working with Nicola.
But what about the contract? Because this is like the broken the contract. But let's assume that in the contract they are saying like the disclosure thing. Like you must keep the information of the.
You can always tell the company. You can always tell the government that the company is doing something illegal.
This is kind of the voidable contract.
No,
no.
It's more like the automatically invalid clauses for exclusion clauses. I can never make a contract that says you're not allowed to tell the government. Because then what if I made a contract that says Nicola is not allowed to tell the government if I do something illegal? Okay, you sign your name. And the next day in front of you, Nicola, I kill one of the employees.
Yeah.
And I say, hey man, you signed the contract. The government doesn't want that. The government wants to know if this is happening. So I can't take away that right. You can't give me that right. So, but the burden of proof is on the employee. I've been a teacher for years in China, and I moved back to America. I take night classes to get a teaching degree. And during the days I work at the local factory, my boss is an older woman. Recently, I asked my boss for a promotion, and she said if I go on dates with her, she'll give me a promotion. And I say no. So she lowers my pay and makes me clean bathrooms and calls me Dirty Toilet David and laughs at me. And I quit and I sue for wrongful dismissal. And they say I'm an employee at will. What do you think? Am I going to win this, Tiffany?
I think no.
No? What?
No.
What do you mean no? What kind of world is that? That's unfair. She fired me because I wouldn't go on dates with her.
I think because it came afterwards. She said going on dates, right? But then she lowered the pay and then called you some bad name. So maybe it's the timing.
Now, it's not the timing. Look, I have a contract to work at this company, right? In this contract, it says that I work at the factory. And let's say every day at the factory, I just work at one of the machines and, checking the quality or whatever I do at the factory. By doing this, has she broken my contract? Why did she lower my pay? Why did she make me clean bathrooms? Can she do that? No, she's broken my contract. I had a contract to work at this machine. She can't just break my contract like that. This is wrongful dismissal, right? I was fired for a reason that violates basic social rights. I don't have to go on a date with her. She can't change my job. My job was to work at this machine. Okay, and there's not much more to say about this. Payment instead of notice, we talked about that before. You can do this as long as it's expressly written in the contract. Dismissal without notice, if there's no notice, if I just walk in today and say, hey, Jody, you're fired right now, only, that's called summary dismissal. I can only do that if there was a fundamental breach. So let's say that I have Jody on camera stealing money from a student's bag. Now that's a crime. I don't need to give Jody 30 days notice or 1 week notice. You commit a crime, you're fired today. And that's called a fundamental breach, right? If you committed a crime, then I don't need to give you 30 days notice. So if Jody gets into a fight with one of the students and punches the student, that's it, man, that's a crime, you're out. You know, I need to give you 30 days notice if I'm firing you for a valid reason, like your behavior at work or your abilities, or we don't need you anymore or something like that. Okay, I know we're over time, but there's one more that I want to cover that's pretty short, and then we'll stop for today. The last one, okay, so wrongful versus unfair, right? I said wrongful has no limit to damages. That's one reason people would choose wrongful. And in wrongful, here's another one. After discovered reasons may be used. That's a pretty big difference, right? Common law is way more open. So if I fired someone and they sue me for wrongful dismissal, I can bring in other reasons. That's okay. So they are a little bit different. You do need to mitigate losses. We learned this in contracts for both of them. Okay, last one is constructive dismissal. I love to play poker. I work at a job with flex time where I can work 40 hours a week, but I can choose when I work. And recently I asked my manager for the afternoon off to play in a big poker tournament. The manager said no, because the company's too busy, but I don't care. I took the time off anyway, because I have flex time. I'm gonna work my 40 hours, but that's it. The manager fired me. I went to the HR department and complained, and they said I could have my job back, but I'd be suspended without pay for 10 days. And I said, no, I can't afford that because I need those 10 days pay. I'm supposed to get a Christmas bonus. So I say, okay, can you give me that? And they say no. I say, okay, can you give me a loan from the corporate HR loan division? And they say no. I know that if I quit, I'm going to get my holiday bonus right now. I tell HR that I have no choice. I don't want to quit, but I desperately need the money. I quit, and then I sue for constructive dismissal. And they say I quit. I wasn't fired. So let's understand this example. In this example, why did I quit this job? Junpyo, why did I quit this job?
Because your pay will be suspended for 10 days.
Well, okay. Did I want to quit this job?
No.
No. Well, then why did I quit?
Because of the money.
So, okay, I was in a situation where I kind of feel like I had no choice, right?
Yes.
Why was I in that situation? Did I do something wrong?
No.
Not really, right? My job says I need to work 40 hours a week, but I can choose when I work. That's the rule for my job. Did I break that rule? No. I asked the boss, because I'm trying to be cool. I asked the boss, hey man, is it okay if I take this afternoon off? And he's like, no, David, we're too busy. But the fact is, I was just trying to be polite. I don't need his permission. I did not break the rules. But I'm being punished anyway. And they're putting me in a situation where I feel like I have no choice but to quit. Let's say, let me give another example. Let's say Carlotta, are you there? Carlotta, nope. Okay, Tiffany. Tiffany, I am going to give you a job. Okay, you are going to help me on my construction job. And you tell me that you are afraid of heights. And I tell you that I need you to work on the 25th floor. And it's just, you know, you're just outside on the 25th floor working on the windows. And you're so scared you can't do it. And then I fire you.
Okay, I think first of all, me saying I'm afraid of heights is a consideration.
The consideration is about what people give each other. You're not giving me anything.
Right, give each other, like I have a position. I say I want to be your employee and you want me to be your employee. And this is a part of the consideration. That's what I meant.
That's not consideration. Consideration, you're not giving me anything. But I'm saying, I tell you, if you want this job, then you need to go work on the 25th floor. And you are just too scared, so you quit. Did I make you quit? I know that you're scared of heights, Tiffany. And recently, you've been working for me for a few months. Okay, you work in my office. You're my secretary. But recently, I decided I want you to quit. Now, I want you to quit because Carlotta is my cousin, and I want to hire my cousin. But of course, I can't fire you for that, right? I can't just say I'm firing you because that's not a good reason. And I have no good reason to fire you. You've been a good secretary, but I want to get rid of you. So here's what I say, Tiffany, I need you tomorrow to go help clean the windows on the 25th floor. And I know you're afraid of heights. And so you say, I can't do that. And I say, well, listen, then look, if you don't want to do the job, you can quit. And so you quit. Did I make you quit?
Definitely.
So in that case, did you really quit? Or did I fire you?
I was placed in a circumstance that's not for me, really.
Yeah. And this is constructive dismissal. When an employer has made an employee's life so difficult that the employee feels they cannot continue in the job, so they quit. And it's important that we have a special rule for this, or else bosses could do exactly what I said. They could make the employee's life terrible. You know, what if CIP wanted to get rid of me? And so they said, David, sorry, we're out of desks. So you can't work in the office anymore. You have to stay in the hallway and meet students in the hallway. We also don't have any computers for you, and you can't use your own. So you need to stay in the hallway and you need to do all of your work by hand with no desk and meet the students. I can't really do my work like that. And so if I quit at that point, actually what happened is they fired me. They didn't say the words, but it doesn't matter if they said the words. Now, the reason that it's hard to prove this is the burden of proof is on the employee. So if this happened with Tiffany, Tiffany would need to prove that I am pressuring her to quit. But this is still a good way to win that case because, you know, it's not, when I fired Tiffany, it's not really unfair or wrongful dismissal. I didn't fire her, she quit. But the truth is she didn't quit, she had no choice. So this is exactly that kind of situation. The example I just gave you with this case is called Western v. Sharp, and the facts are the same. And the court said, yeah, the employer's behavior was unreasonable and Sharp had been dismissed. The way that the employer acted, he had no choice but to quit. You cannot pressure an employee to quit. You cannot put an employee in a situation where they have no choice but to quit. Now, let's say at my English school, my English teaching school, I am angry at Jody. And so I give Jody all of the hardest classes, all of the worst students, and all of the writing classes. So that's the most work. But, you know, he still has the same number of classes as all the other teachers. I just gave him the worst classes. Did I force him to quit? Jody, did I force you to quit?
No.
No. That's not enough. It's not enough just to make someone's life a little harder. It's got to really be a situation where you have no choice but to quit. Anything else we need to know about this? Not really. You just need, I mean, you understand the point. It could be one single event, or it could be a bunch of little small things that I do, but whatever it is, it doesn't matter what the reason is. If you feel like you can't continue working here, it could be that I was mean to you. You know, what if I insult you every day? Every time Jody comes to work, I call him a bad name. Yeah, I mean, you can't work like that. You were forced to quit. You should never have to work in a place where you're being treated badly. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about constructive dismissal. And so that pretty much is it. There's not much more to say in this subject. We'll cover a couple of things next week, but the big thing I wanted you to know from this week was the forms of dismissal. Okay, so we will stop there. Next week, again, as I said, bring your materials. We'll talk about the practice questions that I put on Blackboard, and we'll get ready for the final, which, as far as I know, will be given on the 28th. That's the day I will make it available. Any questions?
Two questions. One is about the constructive dismissal. So is it under wrongful dismissal or under another kind?
Constructive dismissal is a kind of, it's another kind.
Because,
It's another kind, yeah. I mean, it
Okay.
is sort of like wrongful dismissal, but the thing is, it's not, because it's not really dismissal.
and what about the remedies?
The remedies are the same as for unfair dismissal.
Okay, so basically the burden of proof is the same of wrongful, but the remedies are the same of unfair.
Correct.
I would say that.
Correct.
And about the exam, could you make it available? Like, because the data is December 28th, could you make it available like the weekend before?
Let's see, the 28th is I see that's a Monday. So could I make
Yes.
it available the 26th? I think so. Let me just confirm with the office. But I think that should be fine, that I make it available that weekend and then just have it be due on the 28th. Let me just make sure that the office isn't putting it later than that. Because usually the office tells us when the exams are. And this year they haven't yet, so I need to double check.
Because
I
think
asked them and yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, because most of the exams, at least for me, are or 28th or 29th.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a problem making mine, you know, opening it up on the 26th. I don't have a problem, or the 25th even. I'll just double check with the office on that, but I should be fine.
Thank you.
Okay, I made Nicola the host. So any other questions? Nope. Okay, then I will see you guys next week.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.